US President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
Anywhere from $600 billion to $1 trillion will be taken in over the relatively short-term period, meaning a year from now.
Trump is betting big that these tariff plans will revive US manufacturing and boost jobs. That's despite resistance from car makers and investors who say the move is a tax on consumers and will only serve to push up inflation. This latest tariff will add thousands of dollars to the cost of a new car, while hitting the trade partners that, so far, have helped keep costs low.
And this is a direct attack, to be clear, a direct attack on the very workers that I stood in front of. We have put in place the mechanisms so that if it is appropriate for retaliatory tariffs, and there's many considerations to be taken in.
We must consider what will serve Japan's national interest. We're strongly requesting the US not to apply these 25% tariffs on Japan. There are different options. We have to think about which is the most effective and have all options in mind. Trump hopes this will prompt foreign manufacturers to shift production to the US. South Korea's Hyundai has pledged over $20 billion in new US plants. But with higher wage bills and global supply chains, plus innovations in AI and robotics in manufacturing, it's hard to see whether an industrial revival would even be profitable, let alone if it would create jobs like in Detroit's heyday. But for now, Trump is determined the tariffs will go ahead on April the 2nd, a day he's called America's Liberation Day.
And our business correspondent, Sina, is at a Mercedes-Benz production facility here in Berlin. Marie, what does Trump's announcement mean for German car makers like Mercedes-Benz, for example?
Right, for German car makers like Mercedes, which produces some parts for its cars right behind me here, this is bad news. And it's bad news for German car makers specifically because they export the most cars to the United States out of all European car makers. Mercedes, for example, produces its S-Class sedan here in Germany and then exports it to the United States, where it's a very popular luxury car. And this car will now be hit with a 25% tariff. So Mercedes either has to bite that cost itself and dish out more money or pass it on to the consumer, meaning its cars will become more expensive in the US and less competitive, and that spells gloom. According to estimates, the tariffs could wipe out nearly a quarter of Mercedes' projected 2026 operating earnings, and so the German car industry is very worried. We had the head of the German Association of the Automotive Industry, Hildegard Müller, asking for there to be a bilateral agreement between the US and the EU to prevent these tariffs from going into action, because they would really hit the German industry.
Now, what's been the reaction from the EU? Will the bloc retaliate, you think?
Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission, was very, very quick to respond, and she repeated what she has already said about tariffs in the past, which is they're bad for business and they're bad for consumers. And she has also left little doubt that the EU is ready to retaliate. Now, earlier today, a EU Commission spokesperson said the EU is still working on its response, and potentially the EU could be waiting to see if these tariffs actually go into action, because there has been a little bit of flip-flopping on the side of the United States in the past weeks. And it's important to see this latest development within a wider web, a trade conflict web between the United States and the European Union, where Donald Trump imposed or announced tariffs on European metal, and then the EU responded by announcing retaliatory tariffs. But since then, the EU has actually tried to negotiate with the United States. It halted its retaliatory tariffs last week and sent its chief trade negotiator here to Washington, D.C., who only left last night just as these new car tariffs were announced by Donald Trump. So really, the EU has shown a lot of openness to find a solution, to find common ground, while the Trump administration has announced more tariffs. So this is really a complicated web at this point, and it remains to be seen which exact retaliatory measures the EU comes up with.
Well, Germany, of course, affected there with its big car industry, but what other countries will suffer?
Right, we already heard a little bit in the report. We have Mexico, Japan, South Korea and Canada, which actually make up about 75% of vehicle imports into the United States. We have Toyota in Japan, or Hyundai in South Korea, which already saw their stock prices tumbling because of this announcement. And in the past days, actually, there have been efforts to dissuade Donald Trump from going through with this. So Prime Minister Ishida of Japan went to the United States, pledged $1 trillion investment into the country. We had South Korean car company Hyundai announcing a new steel plant in Louisiana. But to no avail, it didn't help. Donald Trump went through with these car tariffs, and now it's reverberating around the globe. But it's important to note that it's not just hitting car companies outside of the US, but also American car companies. Because this idea of an all-American car is really an illusion at this point. You have Ford and Chevrolet, which use sometimes much more than half of its parts that come in from other countries like Mexico. And those car parts will also become more expensive. So American car producers will feel this as well.
Good luck. It's business correspondent Sina there. Thank you very much, Marie. Inga Fechner is a senior economist at ING in Germany, covering international economic developments. She joins me now from Frankfurt. Inga, Trump claims that tariffs would add up to $1 trillion in the short term to US coffers. What do you say to that?
Maybe if you span it over a 10-year period, that might be the case. But if you look at tariff revenue from last year, there was only $77 billion. And now the United States are importing goods worth $3.3 trillion. If you then consider this 20% universal base tariff, that would mean 660 billion tariff revenue inflow. But of course, that would mean that nothing really changes. So that imports still flow into the United States, that nothing changes. But of course, tariffs, they do impact prices. They do lead to less economic output because exporters will also get hurt because other countries are going to retaliate. And then it's also going to lead to less economic growth. So in the end, his math really doesn't add up, and we won't see this high tariff revenue coming into the United States.
Now, Germany is on the list of countries that could face an impact from these tariffs, German cars being very popular in the US. What kind of an impact are we looking at for the German car industry?
Would be quite substantial because for once, of course, we need to consider the tariffs that are applied to cars imported from the European Union to the United States. But then, of course, many German car manufacturers also do have facilities in Mexico. So they're also getting hit from that side. And of course, if other countries also do retaliate, don't forget that more than 800,000 vehicles from German manufacturers are produced in the United States. And then half of it is exported once again to the world. So it's going to hurt not only importers, but also exporters. And many German companies still export cars to the United States. So some 450,000 cars are still exported to the United States. So that is going to hurt for sure. And also some manufacturers don't even have facilities in the United States, such as Audi and Porsche. So they are going to hit pretty much, probably.
Now, let's talk about US car makers. They are also affected, of course. Do the tariffs really help the US automakers and their workers?
honestly, it won't help at all because, for example, when you look at GM, they also do import 50% of their cars, which are sold in the United States. So they do import from Mexico because they have built huge facilities in Mexico, Canada, and the United States. They were regarded as one unity because of USMCA, because of all those trade agreements. And although goods qualifying for USMCA, so parts are excluded, but only the parts that are made in the US, that qualify for made in the US. And if the customs border finds that there has been some miscalculations, then the whole product will also get hit by those 25% tariffs. And don't forget that those 25% tariffs, they are going to get stacked up to already existing tariffs, meaning that with aluminium and steel tariffs of 25%, and then also tariffs of 25% on Mexican and Canadian goods not qualifying for USMCA, the actual tariff rate is going to increase much more than those 25% announced. So US manufacturers are also going to get hit quite hard.
Very briefly, if you can, what does this mean for the global economy? What kind of hit can we expect there?
So if it's only about those car tariffs, the hit will be still rather small, but it's probably in the range of 0.3 percentage points. It, of course, depends on how much is going to be diverted, how much is still being exported, imported. But, of course, if other countries start retaliating, and then, of course, we also have this Liberation Day, so April 2nd, when new tariffs will probably get announced. And if all of this is going to stack up to one another, then the blow might really be quite substantial because other countries will retaliate. We are going to see a full-blown trade war, and that is going to drag down growth. It's already waiting on consumer confidence. It's already impacting business decisions. So it creates uncertainty. It creates stock market volatility, and it's not good news for the economy, for the global economy at all.
Inga Fechner, the senior economist at the ING Bank in Germany, speaking to us from Frankfurt. Thank you, Inga.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Sandra Navidi, founder and CEO of the advisory firm BeyondGlobal. She joins us from New York City. It's good to have you with us. So we've got two stories here. The European Commission says that these tariffs are an act of economic self-harm by the U.S. President Trump says that they could bring in up to $1 trillion. Which is true?
I would go so far as to say that they're part of economic warfare. They don't make sense at all for either party because they're only going to increase prices here while not bringing back jobs. And also they increase the risk of an escalation spiral. And all in all, there are really no positive effects. Sometimes tariffs in general can have positive effects if they're fine-tuned, but not if they're applied with a sledgehammer. And in this case, Donald Trump explicitly says, first of all, he still claims that foreign governments pay for tariffs, which is not true. They're paid by importers. And he says they will generate huge income for the United States. If there's one reason why you shouldn't apply tariffs, it's to generate income for a government, because the dynamics don't work. If goods become more expensive due to tariffs, people will buy them less and less, and then they have to increase tariffs, so that in turn becomes a downward spiral. So it doesn't really make sense.
What about the president's argument that these tariffs will bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States?
I think that's just a pretext, just like the fentanyl argument vis-a-vis Canada, because there was an interview actually that Howard Lutnick gave a couple of weeks ago to CNBC, where he was specifically asked if it would make sense, or if it were to make sense, to bring back jobs to the US, because wages are much higher here than they are in, say, China. And so, in effect, products would become more expensive. And Howard Lutnick answered, no, but we're going to use robots. And I think that's part of the master plan, is to involve the tech industry more and more. For instance, Elon Musk's Tesla is not performing very well. He now sells the promise of humanoid robots, and those could and probably will be used in factories. So all in all, I don't think that those tariffs will create more jobs, also because they're negative for the economy, so people won't even be able to purchase more of these goods.
Ms. Navidi, then how do you explain what what we're hearing from the trade unions, the U.S. Auto Workers Trade Union, for example? They support these tariffs.
Well, on the other hand, there are many CEOs who don't, and there are also unions who see this critically. You have to see, to bring back supply chains, to bring back production to the United States can't be done overnight. It takes years and years and years and investments of billions of dollars. I think if profits had been distributed more equitably and workers would have gotten more of a share, then we wouldn't be at this point, and it wouldn't be, Donald Trump wouldn't even have an argument, even a pseudo argument for tariffs. So I think that's rather short-sighted, especially when you take into account that Donald Trump has threatened tariffs towards Canada and Mexico, considering that a car goes back and forth over these borders up to 8 times. If every time they were to cross the border, those tariffs were levied, a car would become completely unaffordable.
Sandra Navidi, the founder and CEO of the New York-based advisory firm BeyondGlobal. Ms. Navidi, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.